Cool. So welcome. Welcome to us. Welcome
Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
I don't know if you are welcoming me or welcoming
Yes.
the invisible chorus.
Yes. And welcome to Mr. Heidegger, and welcome to the Japanese guy. And I'm gonna be the Japanese person. You're gonna be Mr. Heidegger. And
okay.
So this has been we've been talking a lot about talking, like for the last hour or so before we press record. So, and I think the thing where the conversation kind of moved into, what I'm really present with, which really ties into the reading of this conversation, is how deeply all conversation, speech, right, arises out of silence, right? It's almost like it's the possibility, or you could say silence, like the clearing, right, of all discourse, right? And it is too, just, and because it's if you just think about it, it's hard to imagine anybody talking and then discovering that there's a listening that they were talking into, right?
That's
so
right.
It really just seems like speech is it's necessitated by the listener, and I think that there's the thing I'm getting from this is that the listener, or silence, right, or emptiness, right, all these things kind of tie together. It's a silence and a listening isn't a thing that goes away when the conversation starts. It's actually still there, right? It's like it is the tone or the non-tone that tones through the whole thing. And in many ways, this conversation exemplifies this because, I think we're going to be talking where they talk about the word koto, which is the word in Japanese for language. And we spent most of the conversation not to them talking about how it wasn't it wasn't the right time to say the thought that had to do with this, right? And so
that's right.
There's a way where they explicated the not, right, the thing not said, and the silence, and held it, right, bared it, right, in their conversation in this kind of reverential, respectful way. And that's so interesting because I really got this sense of that it was, as we walked along and talked, the bearing, it was growing. It was like, it was being, the conversation was being impregnated by it, right? Yeah, and so that's the point. So this kind of thing about silence. And you were talking about, Chris, earlier, about one of the things that's difficult about all the social media Zoom stuff is it really kind of like it really, you're right. You can't, one of the things that makes it so exhausting is that you really can't fall into silence the way that you can in an embodied conversation. We're in the same room.
That's right.
It's like a very different silence.
Yeah, it inscribes a different meaning into the kind of symbolic order of a conversation, right?
Yeah.
I think virtual silence in this medium, it kind of intimates diffidence almost, or aloofness.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a purposeful abstention from the scope of the conversation. To me, it always, it's often not meant that way by anybody, but it smacks of that to me, right? It seems to imply a kind of disdained retreat from participation. And now, sometimes I'm sure it is, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just waiting for forbearance or restraint or reticence, right? All of the typical things, all of the typical reasons for silence in a conversation. But for whatever reason, especially in a group setting, right? One-to-one like this is very different. But but in a more sort of communal social setting and in a more idle communal social setting, silence reads as abstention. And that's unfortunate
Mm,
because silence never has to be abstention,
yeah. Yeah.
right?
Totally.
And
Huh.
yeah. So anyway, I don't know.
So I will begin. Okay, so we're on
Yes.
page, if you're following along with us, we're on page 45. This is Heidegger and the speaking with the Japanese philosopher. Okay. Again, I'm not a Japanese person. Up to this moment, I have shielded away from that word because I must give a translation which makes our word for language look like a mere pictograph, to wit, something that belongs within the precincts of conceptual ideas. For European science and its philosophy try to grasp the nature of language only by way of concepts.
What is the Japanese word for language?
It is koto ba.
And what does that say?
Ba means leaves, including and especially the leaves of a blossom petals. Think of cherry blossoms or plum blossoms.
And what does koto say?
This is the question most difficult to answer. But it is easier now to attempt an answer because we have ventured to explain iki, the pure delight of the beckoning stillness, the breath of stillness that makes this beckoning delight come into its own in the rain under which that delight is made to come. But koto always also names that which in the event gives delight itself, that which uniquely in each unrepeatable moment comes to radiance in the fullness of its grace. Okay, let me read that one more time.
Please.
Yeah. Again, what IKEA is, what is IKEA again? I think that was, they talked about that last time. Icky is Icky.
We did. I'm just scrolling up to look. I can't remember now.
I'm not sure. Okay. So this is
we'll come back to that eventually.
What does Koto say? I'm gonna read it again. This is the question most difficult to answer because it is easier now to attempt an answer because we have ventured to explain Aiki, the pure delight and beckoning stillness. I want to pause there for a moment. So this is really interesting. Like this thing that he just said, like it is much easier now to attempt an answer because we have ventured to explain Aiki, the pure delight of beckoning stillness. You know, so there's this kind of I think what I'm hearing in that is there's this some way in which in addressing Aiki, right, that, and this is what's interesting about the conversation, is that thing that happened in the past of the conversation is present, right, and showing itself in its making it easier to talk about the thing he wants to talk about, right? Like, because we addressed that and spent time with that, there's a way where there's a way that the condition of the conversation, the substance of the conversation is more readily disposed for addressing this other difficult thing that's hard to say. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
interesting to me of like how we know that, right?
Mm.
Like we do know that, right? Like I was talking with you before about silence and about one of the most sacred things for me is being able when you can be with somebody or a group of people such that you can share silence with each other, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like the most sacred. It's so good, right? And because that's silence, right? I think it's something similar to what he's addressing here, right? Like and you could probably say that, like, yeah, because we've already talked about Ike, right? Um, Process of talking about that conditioned the silence in such a way that we can actually it can support the next venture of speech, right? But it's in
Mm-hmm.
the yeah, it's like that, and I think it's also who is it? Yo-Yo Ma, the composer. Um, my understanding talks a lot about this. Like he says that like the really the note that you're actually that you're continually I don't know if he said creating or playing is the silent note.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's actually the thing that you're affecting is you're conditioning
Mm-hmm.
silent note. Um,
That's right.
all the sound, all the like the regular sounds are all what you're really listening into, and what's being played is the silence. And so I'm kind of getting this sense, that same sense in the musicality of the conversation. Right?
Yeah, yeah. It's the figure ground reversal, right? It's inverted the orientation of what he focuses on when he plays, right? So it's I get this image sometimes when we're talking about this, when we're talking about the relationship between silence and speech, as we so often do. I get this image of a um, creek with rushing water, and a creek that's kind of littered with stones, as they often are. But some of the stones kind of protrude out of the water, and the water seems to rush around the stones, right? So you see it; it's a clear stream, and then speckled along the path are these bits of gray and brown and whatnot. And I see that it's like that figure ground reversal, the aspect shift between the speech and the silence, coming to focus on one as opposed to the other. Sort of like, imagine you're looking at the stream and you're concentrating on the stones, because the stones are the objects, right? The
Mm,
stones are the most concrete, the most well-defined, the most compassable
yeah.
objects in the stream. And so you're looking at the stream and you're focusing on the rocks, and the rocks are um, are the salient feature of that perspective, of that frame. And then suddenly imagine shifting the aspect so that the rushing water becomes the focus
Yeah.
and the rocks virtually turn invisible,
Yeah.
right? So you've gone from focusing on these objects that are affected by this torrential, by this very kinetic force around them. And then suddenly you shift from looking at the objects affected by that force to looking at the force itself.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And that's how I imagine that figure ground reversal from speech back into silence again. Is that really the impression of what is moving
Mm.
changes,
Mm-hmm.
right? The rocks are not moving. The
Yeah.
water is moving,
Right. Right.
right? It's kind of a maybe a bit of a Heraclitan move, but
Totally. It's great.
that's one at least for me. I found that helpful, that image,
Mhm.
just in thinking about this reversal.
Right. Right.
And then the other image that comes to mind, they're both very natural kind of uh, um, um, both ecological images. I don't know why, but that's what comes to mind is when you're talking about how they're kind of preparing the ground into which this concept will be planted into the conversation.
Yeah.
And I have the image of a bulb that hasn't unfurled yet, that hasn't effloresced into its form, right?
Yeah.
And what they're doing is, in fact, they're kind of planting a garden around this one bulb.
Right.
So that when it does effloresce, it will effloresce at the center of a system that has been designed to support it, to draw contrast, to draw comparison, to draw distinction, and to couch and support its emergence.
Right. Right.
And so what they're doing is they're kind of planting a garden of speech around their object, so that its emergence is somehow, it emerges into a place of preparation. So that it can flourish and be known in relation to what has come before it.
Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's like we talked about this before, right? That speech has to be timed, right? That sort of kairotic intercession of speech needs to be aligned to the moment of its proper affordance. And I think that's what they're doing, right? It's like they're forestalling. But as they forestall, they're making these preparations so that it's not going to emerge into a contextless, barren environment. Everything they're doing is trying to populate its company, so that when it does emerge, it will be in good company and be known in accompaniment.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the one note that Yo-Yo Ma is waiting to play can only be played as a succession to the notes that must be played first, that must come before.
Yeah. So good. So good. I'll read the rest of this. The breath of stillness that makes this beckoning delight come into its own is the rain under which that delight is made to come. But Koto always also named that which in the event gives delight itself, that which uniquely in each unrepeatable moment comes to radiance in the fullness of its grace. Okay, so he's saying a couple of things. So like on one level, he's saying the word, again, you're talking about the word that means language in Japanese, saying, okay, well, one level, the breath of stillness that makes this beckoning delight come into its own in the rain under which that delight is made to come. But also, Koto also names that which in the event gives delight itself, that which uniquely in each unrepeatable moment comes to radiance in the fullness of its grace. So interesting just to kind of think about that. I mean, what I was doing was just kind of holding, like, just holding at the same time that he's talking about language, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, from that standpoint, there is, especially this last thing that he said, the second point, right? Which was like, it's that in which the event gives delight itself, that which uniquely in each unrepeatable moment comes to radiance in the fullness of its grace. Yeah, it's gorgeous.
It's very beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very beautiful.
Yeah. It's gorgeous.
Koto then would be the appropriating occurrence of the lightning message. Sorry, the lightning message. Let me do that again. Koto then would be the appropriating occurrence of the lightning message of grace.
Beautiful.
The appropriating. Oh, I'm just going to take that again, actually, Guy, just for my own benefit.
Yeah, please.
Koto then would be the appropriating occurrence of the lightning message of grace. Okay, it's a very verbal. It's a very verbal definition it gives.
Yeah. Appropriating. What does appropriating mean?
Appropriating, like assuming, taking on, making manifest.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one, eh? It's a very, very equivocal term.
Yeah.
Very equivocal term. I see it as making manifest in the form of some particularity.
Yeah.
Right? Because appropriating is usually appropriating to a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Purposing, actually.
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, I think. Appropriating is purposing.
Okay.
And then reappropriating is a repurposing.
Yeah.
Like a redirection of redirection of formal cause or something like that.
Right.
Anyway, I don't know. No need to get into Aristotelian definitions or anything like that. But yeah, I think that's God.
The language then would be the appropriating occurrence of the lightning message of grace. So the occurrence that is appropriating of the lightning message of grace. Okay. Oh, I'm next.
Maybe because you used the word earlier, the word incarnate is coming to mind to me as I read this.
Right.
You've prefigured its presence in this reading today, so it's coming not inappropriately.
Yeah,
it's coming to mind.
So I go on. Beautifully said.
Yes.
Beautifully said. Only the word grace easily misleads the modern mind.
It leads it away into the precincts of impressions.
Whose corollary is always expression as the manner in which something is set free. It seems to be more helpful to turn to the Greek word charis. Did I say that right? Charis?
I think, I think so.
Word charis, which I found in the lovely saying that you quote from Sophocles in your lecture, Poetically Man Dwells, and translated graciousness. This saying comes closer to putting into words the breath-like advent of the stillness of delight. So I just got, like, thinking about language, it's funny, I just kind of heard the breath-like stillness, right? So there's that saying of the word. I kind of felt I sensed that, or saw that, or heard that in that.
The breath-like advent of the stillness of delight.
Yeah.
And something else too that I wanted to say there, but could not offer within the context of the lecture. Charis is there called tiktusa, that which brings forward and forth. Our German word dichten. Dichten says the name. Thus, Sophocles' lines portend to us that graciousness is itself poetical, is itself what really makes poetry, the welling up of the message of the twofolds unconcealment. Take that last part again. Thus, Sophocles' lines portend to us that graciousness is itself poetical, is itself what really makes poetry, the welling up of the message of the twofold's unconcealment.
Yeah. Welling up of the message of the twofold's unconcealment. And again, I think in this, he's referring, twofold means basically the ontological difference, the distinction between being and being. So it's like,
Right. Yes. Yeah. Thank you for bringing that to mind. Yes, that's exactly it.
That graciousness is itself poetical, is itself what really makes poetry. Okay, so what really makes poetry, the welling up of the message of the twofold's unconcealment. So he's saying that, like, so the grace, something like the grace of language, or the grace that is language, can be allowing the message to well up, revealing the twofold's unconcealment. Right. So he's basically saying this. So poetry can be that way to reveal, because it's tricky, especially like it's tricky with something like being, especially with being. I mean, this is the ultimate trickiness, right? Is that because being discloses and hides itself in beings, right? How is it that you can reveal it, right, in such a way that doesn't that preserves itself as it is, which is not the content but the context, if you will. Like, so another way of saying is like, he's saying that something about poetry allows context to show itself, right, without making it a content, right? And that's really tricky, right? I think that's what he's kind of addressing there. The way that, a way that language and poetry specifically can do that.
That's good. And it has something to do with the stillness, right? The stillness keeps coming up.
Yeah.
That somehow the distinction and the indistinction taken together between being and beings is unconcealed by their mutual stillness in the advent of language.
Distinction and distinctionless.
And indistinction. Yeah, right? There's separability.
Yeah.
And their inseparability, in other words.
Right.
That the stillness of this, like this.
Yeah.
Right, that the stillness in the act of speaking, and then
Right.
of course the silence involved in the act of speaking as well, that the stillness inheres both the indistinct and the indistinct relationship in the twofold.
Yeah. I'm thinking about suchness.
Yeah, perfect.
Right?
Perfect. Yeah.
Because there's a way in suchness that, like, what makes it suchness is the particular. Somehow presences the inexhaustibleness.
Yes.
But without representing it.
Yes.
Like it should.
Yes. Because it's somehow
without representing it or something, right?
Yeah. Well, but I think it's somehow that the suchness does in fact represent, like it, part of its dialectical identity is that suchness represents the possibility of its being more. Right? It entails the possibility of its being more. The specificity of such requires more of it to be understood, and therefore requires the unconcealment of more of it as such.
Yeah.
Because the thing about suchness, right, is that its specificity is such that because it's incomparable, it cannot be likened. Its likeness has to be drawn unto more of itself for it to be more like anything. What could it be more like except for itself if it is to be all the more known?
Right.
It's like, right? It's like Guy as such. If I am to know Guy more, I can't know more of Guy by knowing not Guy.
Right.
So there's a sort of an interesting, it's like a dialectical identity claim. I think.
Dialectical identity claim.
Or something like that. I don't know.
It sounds like a
cheap suit.
A new political bumper sticker or something.
Oh no. All right, let me back that. Let me back that way up then.
Right. Interesting. Well, they talked about, earlier they were talking about, they brought up Hermes, right? Hermes is the trigger.
Yeah.
Right.
And then when they were talking about hermeneutics, they were talking about the translating, talking about it as an act of translation, and talking about it as a hermetic entity, a hermetic exercise. Yeah.
All right. So I'll go on.
Yeah.
I would need more time than our dialogue allows to follow it through the new prospects you have opened with your remark. But one thing I see at once, that your remark helps me to say more clearly what koto is.
And that seems to me indispensable if I am to think at all adequately. Your Japanese word for language, kotoba, along with you.
You will remember that point in the dialogue where I named to you the Japanese word allegedly corresponding to the distinction between estheton and noeton, iro and ku. Iro means more than color, and whatever can be perceived by the senses. Ku, the open, the sky's emptiness, means more than the suprasensible. So the moreness, right?
I was just gonna say, you brought it up, and how prescient of you, because it maps pretty well onto that distinction.
Yeah.
You could not say in what the more consists.
You could not say what the more consists, yeah. But now I can follow a hint which the two words hold.
In what direction do they hint?
Toward the source from which the mutual interplay of the two comes to pass.
Which is?
Koto, the happening of the lighting message of the graciousness that brings forth.
Koto would be the happening holding sway.
Holding sway over that which needs the shelter of all that flourishes in flowers.
Then, as the name for language, what does kotoba say?
Language, heard through this word, is the petals that stem from koto.
That is a wondrous word, and therefore inexhaustible to our thinking. It names something other than our names, understood metaphysically, present to us. Language, glossa, lingua, long. For long now, I have been, it says loth, but I think it's probably loath, to use the word language when thinking on its nature. For long now, I have been loath to use the word language when thinking on its nature.
But can you find a more fitting word?
I believe I have found it, but I would guard it against being used as a current tag and corrupted to signify a concept.
Yeah.
I like that.
Which word do you use?
The word saying. It means saying, and what is said in it, and what is to be said.
What does say mean?
Probably the same as show, in the sense of let appear and let shine, but in the manner of hinting. Okay, let's stop there for a second.
Yeah.
It's the logos.
Yeah. 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 So tell us what has it.
Because he's talking about it as both, like he's talking about the coming into being that ensues by the utterance of whatever is spoken, right? So what does he say here? He says, it means saying and what is said in it and what is to be said. What does say mean? Probably the same as show, in the sense of let appear and let shine, right? In the beginning was logos. Let appear and let shine, but in the manner of hinting, right? So that the idea of saying as effective of being.
Yeah.
Saying as the order of intelligibility, but also saying as the effectiveness of being that is made intelligible.
Yeah.
And that's what makes me think logos.
Yeah. Definitely. But in a manner
the word.
Probably the same as show, in the sense of let appear and let shine, but in the manner of hinting. So like hinting is something like, I think in that hinting seems to address, it has that quality of being careful or full of care, right?
Mm-hmm.
For revealing something that that it's important for it to remain. If the way that it works really is banking on in its hiddenness or concealedness, it's like a way of hinting is a way of allowing it to be shown without unconcealing it, right?
Yeah. That's right. Right.
On some level, this is what this whole conversation's been about.
That's right. Which makes it more effective. Yeah. Effective, like in the literal sense of the term, right?
Yeah.
Causative of effect.
Yeah.
Because there's a sense in which if it's simply spoken, if it's revealed without also being reconcealed, then it will not be effective. It won't be generative.
Right. And if we look at go on. Yeah.
No, go please.
If we look at like, it's effective. This way of being careful, and hinting, allowing it to show itself from itself as it is, right? Preserving it, right? It really takes something to do that, right? It's effective, but it fucking takes something to do that. What is it?
Yeah.
You think? Like if, like, for example, we were like, we're going to interview people, right? And you go like, all right, you got to do this dialogue and hinting and LFA and all this kind of stuff, right? So we got to make sure you're good at, you have this virtue, or is it a virtue that they're demonstrating or exercising? What does it take to have
It
this?
definitely takes reverence, I think.
Yes. Bingo. Yep.
If you don't have reverence for what speech can affect, then you use it wantonly.
Yeah.
But if you do have reverence for what speech can affect, in the sense of both revelation, recollection, uncovering, and also in the sense of generation, emergence, production, whatnot. If you have reverence for those effects, then you have reverence of your capacity to intercede in the experience of being, yours, maybe that of the person opposite you. And if you revere the capacity to intercede in being, then you have no choice but to be full of care, as you say.
Yeah.
You have no choice but to be full of care.
Yeah. Right.
If you know that spoken or unspoken is going to vector it's going to vector the intelligibility in virtue of which the relation is cast and the world is created. Between those two people.
Right.
And if those become the stakes, those are ultimate stakes.
Yeah. Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they're so they have this reverential observance of the generative but also destructive power of language, or the nameless referent of the named language, which is really what they're talking about, right?
Yeah.
That's why they keep saying language. Language doesn't quite seem to capture it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because language does not connote that for us. Language does not connote the effect of being.
Yeah. Right.
It connotes representation.
Yeah.
It does not connote participation, right?
Yeah.
But for them, they understand that the vector of language is it's the stem of participation. It's the stem of their participation in being and in being together with one another.
Right. Yes. Right. I'm thinking about, like, one of the things so there's this book that I've been secretly, like, contributions or not. This is really cryptic, is like it's really, really difficult to break into because he's doing something I don't even think he quite understands exactly what he's doing. But
he's Heidegger at his most Heideggerian.
Yeah, really is. And he's talking about like that it's a way, he's calling it, he uses the term inceptive thinking. And it's a thinking that's an enactment. In other words, it's a talking that isn't a talking about, but it's not a talking that stands over and against the matter in which it's speaking.
Right.
It's in some sense births existence as language. Like that's, I think, what he's attempting to do.
Okay.
Just like, and he calls it the other beginning, which speaks to the first beginning, which was, with Heraclitus and the pre-Socratics, which he thought was the first inception, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and you think about it, essentially they really did. They thought a thought became a world, right? And it became possible a world in which we're all inside of right now, right? Like distinction, right. The ontological difference, basically, right?
That's right.
Like so unlikely that would be spoken or said or named, but like if it wasn't, there'd be no science, right? There'd be no all the stuff with the West, right? So he's, I think what he's saying is like he wants to go back from the first beginning and in a certain sense begin again, right? But in accord with it, right? Like in some way. I don't quite know if I totally understand it, but it has this whole thing has this quality of like, it's language that is actually in some sense saying a word, announcing, right? A word, calling forth speech, like a speech that isn't like representing something. It's a speaking it, right?
It's like an act of conjuration.
Yeah.
Right.
And so I think it's in some way I'm hearing a lot of that in here of like this, well, what does it take, to hint these ways that kind of, because it's a way, I think what he's saying is like, because if you don't, then you start to, you can start to use language without a non-reverential language, but in some sense it's still an acting, yet it's unbeknownst to you, right? It's still doing that. It's not just representing, right? Or in representing, it's doing something. So I think that's a little bit what he's talking about. So the reverence has this quality, like my understanding of reverence, what's really cool about reverence is that it bestows a respect, right? And a humility that's an appropriate response to the profundity of something that you're in the presence of, like to revere, like. And so I think in some way this is opening up or hinting to kind of what would happen if we really talked in such a way, spoke in such a way that really, really took that seriously. Really, really, like, what if we said that language was being, right? And we really said that. We took that really seriously. Like,
what if we acted as if? What would happen if we acted as if? What would happen? What would happen if we played if we played as if language were being? How would that form of play change the nature of our relationship to language?
Yep.
And
Yep.
change its capacity to fertilize our encounter with being, or refertilize our encounter with being? Yeah.
Speaking of
right,
situations, I'm leading circling tonight. It's Thursday night, and I have to be there at 6, and it's almost 6:00.
aha. So I can't hoard your time anymore because there are all kinds of people who are just
could, man.
who are just waiting.
Yeah, you're welcome to join
We
me.
want guy. We want guy. We want guy. Okay, my friend. I shall let you go.
As always.
Pleasure's always mine. Pleasure's always mine. Talk to you soon, man.
I'll send you a link to this. Okay, bye.
Sounds great. Bye.